The hospital bill glowed on Amara's phone screen like a death sentence. 400,000 naira, due in 3 days, or her father would be discharged from dialysis and sent home to die. Amara Chukwu was 22 years old. In her final year of university, surviving on Garian borrowed textbooks, when the doctor pulled her aside in the hallway and told her plainly that without payment, there was nothing more the hospital could do. She had already sold her mother's old jewelry. She had already begged her lecturers for extensions, her landlord for patience, her few relatives for loans they didn't have to give. That afternoon, walking home past the glass towers of Victoria Island under a punishing Lagos sun, she felt something inside her quietly give way, the particular exhaustion of a person who has tried every honest door and found them all locked. If you believe that kindness finds people even in their darkest hour, and that second chances are real, give this video a like, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories so you never miss what happens next. It was her friend Ijoma who mentioned the strange arrangement almost in passing. A wealthy man, a business proposal, a single night, more money than Amara would see in a year of tutoring. Amara had laughed it off at first, ashamed even to hear it spoken aloud. But shame is a luxury for people who have other options. And by the third sleepless night, staring at her father's frail hands and the tube in his arm, she found herself standing outside a hotel on Ozumba Mbadiwe Avenue, her heart hammering, telling herself this was simply a transaction, nothing more, a bridge she would cross once and never speak of again. The man's name was Kelechi Adisa, though she wouldn't learn that until later. She knew only that he was young for someone so powerful, that his eyes held a tiredness that didn't match the wealth around him, and that when she arrived trembling, unable to look at him directly, he did something she didn't expect. He asked if she'd eaten. He ordered food before anything else, sat her down, and when she finally broke and told him everything, her father, the dialysis, the tuition she couldn't pay, the exhaustion of pretending to be fine, he simply listened. Nothing happened that night except a transfer of funds that saved her father's life, and a promise offered quietly that he would tell no one, not even her, how much of himself he had seen in her desperation. Amara returned home before sunrise, the money already sent to the hospital's account. Her father's treatment secured for months. She told herself it was over, a closed chapter, a debt paid to fate. She went back to her lectures, her library shifts, her small rented room with its leaking roof, and tried to forget the stranger's face. But Lagos is a small city for the wealthy, and word travels through Lagos society like wind through tall grass. And 3 weeks later, she saw his photograph in the business section of a newspaper left on a canteen table, and beneath it his name, Kelechi Adisa, CEO of Adisa Maritime Holdings, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in West Africa. Her hands shook reading it. She had not known. She told herself it changed nothing. It was 2 months later, on a bright Tuesday afternoon, that he found her, not through some grand gesture, but simply appearing outside her faculty building, dressed down, almost unrecognizable without the suits the papers loved to photograph him in. He said he'd been trying to locate her for weeks, that her name was the only thing he hadn't asked for that night, and that he regretted it every day since. Amara wanted to run. Instead, she stood frozen under the mango tree by the faculty gate while he explained, haltingly, that he hadn't been able to stop thinking about her. Not the transaction, but the girl who apologized to him for crying, who asked about his tiredness before she asked about the money, who seemed in the middle of her own devastation, more concerned with his well-being than her own. She did not believe him. Rich men, she had learned, were skilled at performing tenderness when it cost them nothing. She told him to leave, that she didn't need his guilt or his charity, that she had survived worse than this and would survive being forgotten by him too. But Kelechi did not disappear. He returned the following week, not with gifts, but with information, and he had quietly arranged a scholarship fund through his company, one that had nothing to do with her name attached to it, meant for final year students supporting sick parents. He told her he wasn't asking her to accept anything from him directly. He only wanted her to know that her story had changed something in him, that a man who had spent a decade building an empire had forgotten, somewhere along the way, what it meant to actually see another person's suffering. It was her father, of all people, still weak but recovering, who told her not to let pride blind her to grace when it appeared. however strangely it had arrived. He reminded her that dignity was not measured by refusing every hand extended toward you, but by how you carried yourself, once you accepted help and turned it into something greater. Slowly, cautiously, Amara allowed Kelechi back into her life, not as a benefactor, not as a memory of shame, but as someone who kept showing up, in daylight without hidden motives, simply wanting to know how her exams went, whether her father's numbers were improving, whether she'd eaten that day. Their friendship deepened over months, built in libraries and hospital waiting rooms and quiet Sunday afternoons. Nothing like the desperate night that had first connected them. Kelechi funded her final year without ever making her feel indebted, insisting it was investment, not charity, in a mind he considered brilliant. Amara graduated at the top of her class, her father sitting proudly in the audience, breathing steadily, his health restored enough to see his daughter's greatest achievement. When Kelechi stood afterward and asked in front of everyone if she would allow him to properly court her, not as the billionaire who had once bought a night, but as a man who had watched her rebuild her entire life through sheer will. She wept, finally allowing herself to believe that shame and grace could occupy the same story, that a single desperate choice did not have to define the rest of her days. If this story touched your heart even a little, if you believe people deserve to be judged by their worst night, but redeemed by every day after, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity can survive desperation, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories for more. And before you go, drop the word grace in the comments below if you believe that our darkest moments don't have to be the end of our story, but sometimes quietly the beginning of something better. Amara now runs a small foundation alongside Kelechi, one that quietly pays hospital bills for families who cannot speak of their suffering out loud, families who, like her, once stood outside locked doors with nowhere left to turn. Proof that the same night which once threatened to break her had ultimately become the reason 1,000 other daughters would never have to make the same impossible choice she did.